Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Educated Colin Snap channel. How you doing? So today I want to talk about Phoenix Force first impressions. Kind of want to give you an overview of it. It's been out for a couple of days or like a day or so. So I actually have more information than I usually do with these first impressions because I usually do them around the time they were released. But here I have a little bit more information. So I just want to talk about my thoughts on it so far, whether I think you should spend your or buy the season pass because of this card, and some deck builds and some ideas and some things to be looking out for. So we can begin. So first off, we can talk about the card itself. So Phoenix Force is a 5/6, 5 energy, 6 power card. It used to be a 5/5 in the art, but it got updated. And it has the ability of reviving one of your destroyed cards and merging with it. And then that merged card can move each turn. So it's a pretty unique ability. I would say definitely one. It's almost like a two-parter. Like the ability to revive one of your destroyed cards and merge with it, that's already like an ability in itself. But then it has the added ability of being able to move each turn. So you get a revive effect, which is something we don't have in the game. And then alternatively, you also get to move. So those are some, and I would say both of those effects are pretty powerful. Moving in itself, I would say, is a pretty powerful card. Not that many people use Vision, but I still think that card has a lot of merit to it. And then having the ability to revive something you destroy also has a decent amount of merit. The downside with this is like you do need to take advantage of the destroy aspect of this card. There are some downsides with an effect like this, in that if you're not running destroy, or if you don't have move synergy or anything like that, this isn't really doing anything better for you in terms of the power level of the card or the stats level of the cards. But it is an interesting card with a pretty cool effect. So I want to talk about, first of all, I always like getting the main gripe out of the way. Do I think you should buy this card, get the season pass because of it? Currently, my thoughts stand as a pretty solid no. However, I do think this card is a card that can potentially get better with time as more cards are being added, as well as people just refining the current existing metagame, or there's a metagame that can take advantage of a card like this. The ability to revive one of your destroyed targets could end up being a very powerful tech tool if it is just a very autopilot Shang-Chi meta. You could use this as a turn 6 play, but generally there's a lot of variability in the decks that aren't fully relying on Shang-Chi, that you can't really do that yet. And there's still things like Spider Ham and stuff that make things annoying. So I do think if you want to future proof yourself, this might be a card that you might end up wanting maybe 3 months down the line. But as for today, right now, I would say, based on first impressions, maybe I'll do a follow-up video and see if it sticks. But my first impressions is this isn't necessarily worth spending your money on at the moment. However, we'll talk about some of the synergies, and we do have some decks to showcase regardless. But that's my initial impression. Uh, so here are some of the cards I do want to talk about. First thing off is just like, there's two parts to this, right? You have the destroy synergy, and then you have the move synergy, and you have things in between, right? So destroy synergy, right? Angel, if you're going to be playing, so with this card, you want early destroy mechanics, right? Because if you're destroying later on, like maybe turn 4 is the latest you'll destroy, but it's still pretty early, and maybe Angel could be a nice like pull from your deck. Obviously, a lot of times it's a Quicksilver, so not a lot of people are like running it, but it is a card that can see play. And if you are just like focused on heavy destroys, that is something you can do. I think um, Human Torch, Dagger, Multiple Man, those are like the early targets for destroy that people have really gravitated towards. I'm actually not the biggest fan of the Human Torch version, because I just think you open it yourself up to Killmonger too much, and that's like too big of a downside. You really need your Human Torch target to live. So I'm more a fan of the Dagger Multiple Man variant, but even those I think are still a little bit iffy to really work out. But that is some synergy here, right? You want targets that can take advantage of the move aspect of this card. Those three really seem to be do the best. Vulture is also another one that I'm sure people are going to talk about that you could also just be a destroy target. It's just Vulture is definitely heavy costing, and obviously you can use Iron Fist to get the procs off, but a lot of times it's just an expensive piece of this. Ebony Maw is something I think is pretty interesting because it's a powerful one drop that you can revive, and since you're being able to move the card, you can kind of mitigate the downside of not being able to play in that lane by moving it out or playing into a lane that you don't care about and moving it afterwards. So I think it can be an interesting tool. Obviously no one's trying it, but I just wanted to mention it. It definitely sounds like something that could work out. Carnage, Venom, Deathlock, those are the destroy aspects. Those are really the cards you're using to trigger or to put something in the grave so you can revive it with the Phoenix. Those are definitely fine. I think Venom is by far the best one because you can destroy anything and still retain the value of it, right? I think if you're running Phoenix Force, Venom is something you want to be adding in a lot of your decks because you could just kill anything you want and then revive it back, right? So you could kill like a 10 power card and then revive it back and not really worry too much about the fact that you're killing off a really powerful card of yours. So that's something I do see happening a lot. Shuri is also another use case that people seem to be gravitating towards just to combo with the Taskmaster. Phoenix Force can make really big stats because you have things like Dagger, you have things like Human Torch. Those things when moved just create like insane stat values. So by running the Shuri, you get to run the Taskmaster synergy, and you can just have these very, very large minions. So it's kind of like a second aspect of the Shuri Taskmaster metagame, where instead of hitting Red Skull, you're just hitting the Phoenix Force and kind of getting similar power, but with the added flexibility of being able to move, which is really, really good because it means that you're not guaranteed to be Shang-Chi. You can still definitely be Shang-Chi, but you're not guaranteed to be. So it's definitely something to look into. Iron Light I thought was interesting just because uh, hitting Phoenix Force is like crazy. I mean, it's essentially the same card, right? Like maybe one cost less, and you still have some things to play around. I guess maybe I mean, Venom would be a good hit, but maybe some of the other destroys could be bad if you're not paying attention to them. But definitely an idea, something to be looking into. I was looking into like Absorbing Man, but I'm pretty sure Absorbing Man doesn't work because the card merges, so you're not gonna be able to copy the Phoenix Force effect, unfortunately. So, but that would have been cool if you could go like Phoenix Force on 5, Absorbing on 6, and revive 2 cards. That would be, but it doesn't work that way. And then Zola is the same thing as Taskmaster, really. So I guess there's 3 different parts of synergies. There's the move synergy, there's the destroy synergy, and then there's the Shuri copy Taskmaster Zola uh, type synergies, and those are really what people have been gravitating towards so far. In terms of things, I mean, I looked through all the cards in the game, right, and I didn't really see anything that stood out to me as like, oh my god, you could do this or that or that. It seems to be like a lot of people are thinking about it, and this seems to be the common consensus so far. Next, I want to talk about some things that do matter when we discuss Phoenix Force itself. First thing, I just want to talk about the card itself. It does have the drawback that you have to revive something to move. Uh, so I think that's probably a pretty big issue in terms of like you lose a lot of flexibility. If this was like at worst case a 1 power reduction vision, like that's that's fine, right? Like it's a Captain Marvel essentially, right? Like that's fine, at worst case. But at worst case, it's just a 5/6, which is awful. So you do have to hit something. You do have to have some destroy synergies. If you don't draw your destroy synergies, you don't have any power in this card. So that's a pretty big downside to it right now. It's also a destroy synergistic card, so armor does mess with it. So you do have to keep that in mind. Same thing with Professor X. So the way Professor X, nothing can be added or destroyed. So you can't add a card. You can't revive anything with the Force to merge. So because of that, it doesn't work with Professor X. Um, Hopefully, if they do play Professor X, like you still win the lane because you have 6 power and they have 3. But like if you're playing in like Nebula or something, you could definitely lose. So you do have to be aware of that in Professor X decks, that there's a big weakness there, especially since a lot of your cards do revolve around Phoenix Force proccing. So like your Taskmaster doesn't have any value if that happens, etc., etc. Um, I do want to talk about copies and fusions and also location bugs. This might be a bug, but they haven't confirmed it. They did confirm the Titania bug, but they haven't really confirmed um, things like Bar Sinister London or Bar Sinister, things that make multiple copies of the Phoenix Force. Only the first one will be able to move, even if you revive. Only the first one. The others don't seem to have that revive ability. Now, I don't know if it's due to the wording of this card, because the other copies don't have that, like didn't have that merge effect, right? It feels like the act of merging is what gives it the ability to move. And since the copies didn't actually merge themselves, right? They just come merged. It seems like their coding or something means that, oh, it didn't merge, so it doesn't move. So due to that, only the first copies move, which is like kind of a downside. Like it makes some locations less playable in that, like, oh, you think you can move everything, but you really can't. So you do have to keep that in mind. That's something that you want to know about when you're playing with this card, that only the first copy of it will move. Um, Second thing, right? I mean, Shang-Chi still like can destroy it, especially if you're playing Shuri into it, right? Like Shuri into this and you just get Shang-Chi is very possible. So you do have to be aware of that. Same thing with like Valkyrie and Shadow King. They could definitely do a lot of work into these deck lists. So just keep that in mind. Like there's a big weakness there. Like armor is a weakness, Shadow King's a weakness. There's a decent amount of counters to this strategy. And I assume well, the Moon Girl was to remind me to talk about copies. And then Hulk Blaster is the other thing I do want to talk about. Since a lot of times people are playing multiple man Hulk Blaster in this deck, if you revive Hulk Blaster, you actually don't get the extra Phoenix Force power. So let's say um, Hulk Blaster dies for some reason, and you revive Hulk Blaster. Uh, well, the Hulk Blaster will then also merge onto another card, but you're not gonna get that. You're not gonna get +10 power. You're only gonna get the +4 from the Hulk Blaster. So that's kind of a downside if you're playing both of those cards together. Hopefully, like it doesn't ever target Hulk Blaster, but it is a noticeable weak like problem there if you are trying to copy random dead cards, and Hulk Blaster is one of them. So just keep that in mind. So those are some of the things to keep in mind. But let's talk about some deck lists that we have here. Um, First one, I would say there's like 3 different decks people are playing, right? There's a destroy angle where you're just playing straight destroy, and then you add Phoenix Force in. Uh, it's generally okay. I wouldn't say you're doing anything like revolutionary by adding this in. You do have like you just got like a better vision, right? Which is like okay, but it's not like game changing. So it's something you can do. This one actually does seem to have like decent stats compared to the other ones, in my opinion. But I feel like I'd rather have a Shang-Chi or something in here personally, but it is something people are playing with. Next one is a more fusion of the two where you're running move, you're running some destroy, and then you're running the Shuri, right? So this is definitely like a Shuri variant here. This seems to be like the more popular one in terms of like play rate. I don't know if it's necessarily that good in terms of the consistency because you just need a lot of moving pieces to work, right? Like I guess as a baseline, it's Shuri. It's a Shuri deck, right? So you can go Shuri, Red Skull, Taskmaster, and like that. Okay, that'll work. But everyone's running Shang-Chi, or a lot of people are running Shang-Chi. So you're not guaranteed for that to just counter you. And there's no defensive, right? There's no armor or anything. So you still just get blown up by those type of deck lists. So that's kind of my issue with this type of list. But it is something people are playing with. This is another very similar Shuri list. This is definitely more Shuri focused than the last one. The other one was a little bit more move focused. This one's a little bit more Shuri focused, where you're running Zola now, you're running She-Hulk and Heimdall just for a little bit more flexibility. But you still keep the Phoenix Force, and you still keep the Carnage Venom, Killmonger, early game engine. So definitely an interesting list that people are trying. Uh, I understand it, but once again, I am recommending not to overall get the card, but I can see the appeal. And then this last list is kind of just something I was looking at myself. I'm just taking Broken Bounce and then I'm putting Phoenix Force in there. One of the issues I was having with some of the other lists is there's no Shang-Chi. And I really wanted to still run Shang-Chi just generally because I just think it's really good in the meta right now. And this one just looked good to me. You get to run Kitty, you get to run some of your Shang-Chi. You have the Beast for the synergies with the Iron Fist. So that one's pretty good. And you still get to play Phoenix Force hitting some pretty cool targets. I even think Kitty's not a bad hit. Human Torch, I would say, is probably or Multiple Man's probably your best too, but the others are not too bad, and there's definitely some synergy there. So those are kind of the list I would be looking at, but I feel like you could probably just play regular bounce and be fine. Like there's no need to spend $10 here is what I'm thinking, right? You could just play regular bounce and I feel like you probably do the same or better. So it's not adding anything unique or different or like, oh, if I don't have this card, it feels a lot worse. That's not really happening here. So that's generally my thoughts on it overall. Now there are some things I want to talk about just to like reinforce my thoughts on not getting the card initially. Like obviously, maybe in like 2-3 weeks, maybe with a patch, things will change. But I do want to talk about some things here. So here we're looking at Untapped GG's meta list, and you can see when it comes to ranked recently, Phoenix Force is B at the top of B, very high. But when you look at the actual data, it kind of lies to you. First of all, popularity isn't super high, but it is a paid card, so that one's the counter. But if you look at the win rates compared to everything else, it's not very high win rate. I would say like 58 is extremely high, right? But 52 is, I mean, this is ranked, right? So there's probably some bots messing with the numbers a little bit, but still 52 comparative to like 57, 55, 53, 58 is not like that much better, even though it's like very high in the list. The average cubes are high, and that just what that tells me, or what I take away from that, is that the deck is just new, and people just don't exactly know when the opponent is strong, when the people who play Phoenix Force, Shuri into Phoenix Force or whatever, they don't know that they should leave right now. And I do feel like over time, people are going to get better. People are going to understand that those decks, and you're not going to be getting these huge swings when you win. So that's my thought. Like, if you go Human Torch, you hit the Human Torch, you move the Human Torch, and you play Shuri into Phoenix Force. You hit the torch, you move the torch, you play Taskmaster. You're getting like 30 something power on 2 lanes, like that's gonna win you the game, right? And like if you've not seen that, like okay, like yeah, that's gonna be very strong. But I think over time people are gonna understand um, some of the weaknesses there and then be able to deal with that. So that's my current thoughts on that in particular. So I wouldn't trust this too much. And then if we do a little bit more digging, which I tend to do, right, we can see that for ranked it's good, but when it comes to conquest, right, it's a lot worse. The numbers are not very good for conquest. And this is all of conquest. You could definitely do proving grounds. You could definitely do silver or gold. There's no infinite, right? But um, just looking at all, you can see like the numbers aren't very reliable in terms of like good. And I would say like Conquest is definitely the more competitive mode, and this is where people are bringing a high evolution lockjaw every time, kitty decks every time, super meta counter decks every time. You're going to be seeing Killmonger. You're going to be seeing tech cards that counter this. I'm running Shadow King personally myself in a lot in the list I showcase, right? So like, there's a lot of stuff that could just mess with you. And you can see like once you get into conquest, it really falters, and that hurts my confidence with this card a lot. It doesn't mean the deck's bad or anything. It's just like it maybe doesn't stack up in a full match environment when it comes to playing against other meta decks. Like in ranked, it's a one shot. You can definitely cheese people, but when it comes to like conquest, so you have to win multiple games. Like maybe that's when it starts to falter. So that's an issue here. And then moving on, like another final, I have two more points, but another thing I did want to look at was just this is just today's time frame. There's a lot of games. People are playing a lot today. But I just wanted to kind of showcase where Phoenix Force would be on this list, right? So if you could see, a lot of people are playing like Carnage right now. It's the third most seen card. It's just, but I mean, that just goes to show you a lot of people playing Phoenix Force. Phoenix Force is actually like up here as well. So a lot of people did buy Phoenix Force. Good for y'all. But what I wanted to show was the win rates, right? So you can see the win rates with a lot of these cards, right? There's a noticeable difference when it comes to these destroy cards. Now, I think that's just because people are playing um, destroy with Phoenix Force. But when it comes to Phoenix Force, it's significantly lower than everything else. Like there's nothing really worse except for multiple man, which I assume is because it's being played in the same deck. Human Torch, same thing, right? But like when you look at bounce, Bishop, Bass, like Hid Monkey, like look at the win rates, right? It's so noticeable, and that just kind of showcases like, ooh, maybe it's being overrated right now in terms of like streamers are promoting the card, but when it comes to actually like numbers and stats, which I love looking at, like it doesn't look too good. And this is ranked, right? So this is like the mode where it should be doing better. When it comes to conquest, right, it's not doing that much better itself, right? Like you can see the numbers. It's 45%, which is like by far the lowest, right? Where the other things are like 51, 52, 52% is where you want to be. So not a great sign, and that's overall like why I wouldn't fully recommend it. As well as like I've played it into the Phoenix decks, and they are fun to look at and cool, but like they weren't like Zabu level. They weren't like, oh my, they weren't Nebula level where I'm like, ooh, this is a staple I can see me running in lots of different decks. Definitely feel it's more Modork, it's more Nimrod, even though Nimrod got a buff that was kind of relevant, but it's more along those lines where in those decks it might be fun to play, but generally it's not a card you're going to be putting into a lot of stuff. I do think it has tech usability, so that might be less relevant here, and I'm definitely hoping that it's a card that might see more play. But the final point that I do want to talk about is just looking at the future. This is something I also like to do when I look at cards. I'll just look at what's coming up in the next couple. We've talked about I think all these cards that's happening in August. We haven't like fully talked about it, but we've meandered about it a little bit. Dakin, Silver Samurai, X-23, and Lady Deathstrike. None of these really meaningfully buff Phoenix Force. The rest of these don't have like abilities, so I can't talk to them. But for next month, uh, it, Phoenix Force isn't realistically going to get any better. So you have like a month window, and with the spotlight system, you don't know when they're going to add Phoenix Force into it, so it might be like multiple months before you have another chance to realistically get it. But generally, and it's likely I still get the season pass, so I'm not like saying, oh, I won't get it. Like, I think in the future it might be better, but just the like next month's standings, there's nothing coming out that's really going to make it a little bit better. So overall, like, those are like some of the reasons, some of the my thoughts, some decks ideas and stuff. But final thoughts, right? Like, I do think it has potential. The ability to revive is a very powerful mechanic that has tech ability, maybe into a Shang-Chi heavy meta. And the ability to move is just strong. You can dodge things, and you can really control where you want your power to be. It's just right now, there's a lot of constraints with it, and that make it a little bit difficult to fully recommend, and the stats don't really back up this being like a really strong card. Like Spider Ham, right? It came out and like the stats were like, ooh, this is a good card. This one's really not feeling that level. So feel free to try it. Let me know your deck ideas, your deck builds. I do think that there's a good deck somewhere with this, but the issue is maybe the clunkiness. It's heavy cost. 5 is a lot, right? Like 5 power is a big deal. That's where a lot of your big plays come on. So there's maybe some clunkiness there, but overall, those are my thoughts on the card. Hopefully, it helped, and obviously I'm getting a little bit long, but overall, take care of yourselves. Feel free to subscribe if you like. If you're still here, if you watch this long, and you're not subscribed, shame on you. But other than that, take care of yourselves. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next one. Educated calling snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap. Your skills will be